Mena-Watch, der unabhängige Nahost-Thinktank.
A very warm welcome to Mena-Watch. My name is Jasmin Arémi, and joining us today as our esteemed guest is Simon Shirzad. Simon, allow me to briefly introduce you. You've positioned yourself as a prominent voice advocating for peace between a free Iran and Israel, and in essence, you are a significant influencer in this particular field. And you are studying political science at the University of Vienna, if that information is accurate. That's right. And in your Instagram posts, you notably emphasize that the mullah regime in Iran does not truly represent its people, and you advocate for freedom for Iranians, alongside security for both Israelis and Palestinians. A warm welcome, and thank you for joining us and dedicating your time today.
Yes, thank you very much, Jasmina. Good day to you and to everyone watching, and I'm very happy to be here today, yes.
So let's move on to the first question now. How would you describe the current political and societal circumstances currently prevailing in Iran?
Indeed, the situation throughout Iran is exceedingly intricate, particularly since the uprisings that happened 3 years ago after the tragic murder of Gina Mahsa Amini. This event precipitated a complete and utter rupture between the populace and the mullah regime, and what has followed since then has only deepened this complexity. Considering the mullah regime's proxy conflicts against Israel and the recent 12-day war, the internal situation within Iranian society is, I would suggest, quite alarming. This is further corroborated by official statistics from a Dutch institute that specifically analyzes political developments within Iran, that we can confidently assert that approximately 80 to 90% of the Iranian populace within Iran reject the mullah regime as truly representing the Iranian people. Furthermore, among opposition Iranians living abroad, approximately 99% unequivocally reject the Islamic Republic, demonstrating a widespread and profound dissatisfaction with the current regime, both within and outside the nation's borders. Naturally, various groups exist both within and outside the country, such as monarchists, republicans, and even communists, each with their own distinct beliefs. They naturally pursue their own political ideologies and goals. However, it is evident that a societal rupture with the mullahs has taken place, and this sentiment currently prevails. Furthermore, numerous Iranian citizens hold a favorable view regarding Israel's strikes against mullah institutions and the Revolutionary Guards, considering them as warranted actions. Thus, they held a very favorable view towards these attacks, and furthermore urged Netanyahu to see the task through to its conclusion. Naturally, the revolution must emanate from the Iranian populace itself, even if the Iranian people require assistance from foreign nations. However, it is solely up to us, the Iranian people, to complete this task ourselves, ensuring we achieve a truly democratic and liberated Iran, precisely.
Following the reimposition of UN sanctions, the economic situation in Iran is also currently worsening. There is rampant inflation, widespread impoverishment, and significant supply shortages. I'm curious, what's your opinion on the regime's stability given these conditions? Are they still capable of operating effectively? What's the current situation? How can we evaluate it?
We genuinely need to recognize and explicitly articulate the following crucial point. The Islamic regime in Iran has truly never been this feeble and unstable throughout its entire existence since the year 1979. So, if we take a boxing ring as a metaphor, it lacks that last punch, and the mullah regime would be knocked down and wouldn't get back up again. The country's economy has never been in worse shape in the entire history of ancient Persia. It's a glaring failure for a nation that boasts the world's second largest gas and fourth largest oil reserves, that no genuine prosperity is ever generated for its own populace. Instead, funds are channeled into groups like HAMAS, HEZBOLLAH, or the HOUTHIS, while the mullah regime enriches itself from the vast wealth of the country itself, and frankly, they just line their own pockets with it. Furthermore, we face extensive poverty, prevalent child labor, and a complete absence of women's rights, though many women are fiercely resisting, with numerous individuals no longer wearing headscarves at all, alongside a lack of free speech. The dire economic state undeniably underscores a paramount concern for the nation, so the mullah regime is failing on all fronts. Environmental protection is another issue that shouldn't be ignored. However, if we consider the period prior to 1979 and the reign of the Shah of Persia, when Iran was very much allied with both the US and Israel, fostering excellent connections, Iran then ranked among the top 10 most economically stable nations, and its currency, the rial, was poised to become one of the most robust worldwide. However, at this very moment, even zeros are being eliminated, so zero values are being completely removed because the regime simply cannot keep pace with the ongoing collapse in the value of their very own currency, the Iranian rial. And truthfully, the economic situation is merely a reflection of that fact. The incompetence of the Islamic regime, and that for a modern state, secularism is deeply crucial. Its profound relevance and utter essentiality lie in the need for a modern society to maintain a clear separation between politics and religion, and that can only bring about a free Iran and lasting peace in the Middle East if there's a truly strict separation between politics and religion. Politics must serve all Iranians, irrespective of their ethnic background, their beliefs, or their gender. And yes, this fundamental change will, in turn, be appropriately reflected in the economy.
The protests, rallying under the inspiring slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom," were also savagely crushed by the regime. A significant number of activists are presently incarcerated or have vanished, yet the yearning for change appears to remain unbroken and undeterred. It means you can definitely observe that, as you've mentioned, numerous women are actively resisting, for instance, by opting not to wear a headscarf. So how's the national mood? Are the people predominantly feeling resigned, cautious, or hopeful? Are they angry? Is there a significant amount of resistance?
Yes, I must say, 3 years ago, the resistance was visibly physical. Street clashes with the mullah regime's militias erupted in Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Kermanshah, and naturally in the Kurdish regions of Iran, as well as in Baluchistan, in Zahedan. However, the protests are now manifesting in a different way in daily life. For instance, we've also touched on the economy. Due to the struggling state of the Iranian economy, a significant number of people in Iran are expressing their dissatisfaction by writing on their banknotes. This has also become a novel routine, a freshen gag, or if you will, or perhaps a silent protest. People are now writing down with the mullah regime on their banknotes. In a broader sense, as I briefly mentioned in response to the prior question, it's about how. Many women are no longer wearing a headscarf at all. Additionally, the system cannot target all women, as the Iranian populace, and particularly the women of Iran, are mightier than those who oppress them. And indeed, this also serves as a strong indication of protest, because the women in Iran have truly grown weary of the gender-based apartheid prevailing under the mullah regime. And the civil uprising, perhaps it's no longer manifesting itself in direct conflicts with the militias, the morality police, or the revolutionary guards at this very moment, but rather purely through acts of civil disobedience. And, for example, as a woman, I choose not to wear a headscarf now. My displeasure I inscribe upon the banknotes. Today, we are closing our businesses throughout the city, or indeed the whole country, to make a statement that we disagree with this misguided policy, which is driven by Islamist and fascist motives on the part of the Islamists who have held Iran captive since 1979. Yes, so there are many forms, people are very creative. For example, there's also a cutlet day for Persian cutlets. This is a truly excellent Persian dish. After Soleimani was assassinated during the first Trump administration, Iranians turned it into an unofficial national holiday, where when a high-ranking revolutionary guard is killed, they celebrate the occasion with cutlets. A high-ranking revolutionary guard is assassinated, especially as it was in the Soleimani instance. People celebrate the event by having cutlets for dinner. Thus, there exist numerous innovative strategies, and this narrative is far from reaching its conclusion. In their minds and in their words, they're already done with the mullah regime. All that's left now, the final thing, is to take action, and that action heralds a revolution against the Islamic Republic, leading to a liberated Iran that will bring about greater stability and peace across the entire region, and indeed the whole world.
This is, of course, quite challenging because the regime has intensified its repression, employing death sentences, mass arrests, and strict media censorship, particularly regarding the snapback mechanism. In addition to these silent protests, is there still sufficient leeway remaining for civil society resistance, such that this very protest or even this revolution you've been discussing could potentially erupt and manifest itself?
Yes, I believe that what one truly must not overlook in the context of Iran, and I consider this to be a massive cornerstone, and perhaps the greatest existential threat to the mullah regime. 2/3 of the populace is currently younger than 35 years of age. The biggest Iranian population outside of Iran resides in the United States. Many Iranians have relatives residing in the US or in Europe, specifically within the Western world. And the people are truly yearning for Iran to finally open its borders and establish lasting peace. There's a deep yearning not to be economically vulnerable, not to be embroiled in conflicts with neighboring states in the Middle East. Instead, the profound wish is for amity, tranquility, and the genuine opportunity to further one's education, build a meaningful life, and enjoy a fulfilling existence with one's family. So I believe these are deeply human and entirely understandable needs, which all people would share. And these are fundamentally human needs, particularly those that inherently possess the capacity to make the regime's current situation even more unstable and vulnerable. Yet, as you, Jasmin, correctly highlighted, various matters have indeed intensified considerably subsequent to the 12-day war. Many people were already being executed and imprisoned because of the uprisings 3 years ago. But now, with the 12-day war, they've implemented additional internet blackouts and stepped up surveillance measures. Individuals are simply apprehended and then executed on the pretext of espionage for Israel. Things have greatly intensified, but we must remember Iran also has a fascinating phenomenon. Iran stands as one of, indeed perhaps the foremost nation concerning conversions to Christianity. Moreover, more than 1,000 mosques in Iran were forced to close. So the mullah regime, with its oppression and repression against its own people, is achieving the exact opposite. The population distances itself further from the regime and leans more towards freedom. It's a powder keg, and on an annual basis, there are always uprisings occurring due to the economic situation, women's rights, the predicament of minorities, and the freedom of speech of young people. And it seems to me every time there are uprisings, they get more and more intense and larger. And last time, 3 years ago, it engulfed the entire country. Multiple groups were profoundly affected by the tragic fate of a young Kurdish Iranian woman. This truly signals a profound historical turning point, reaching far beyond Europe with Putin's invasion of Ukraine or the Hamas pogrom that took place on October 7th. Moreover, a monumental shift is unfolding in Iran, and indeed we find ourselves navigating incredibly tumultuous times. Due to its crucial geopolitical position, Iran remains a nation of immense significance, and even with its deficient political leadership, the country steadfastly retains its pivotal role as a vital bridge connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia.
You always speak out publicly for the normalization of relations between Iran and Israel. That's breaking a taboo, both within the Iranian power apparatus and among parts of the opposition. So, what specific kinds of reactions are you receiving from Iranians concerning that matter?
Yes, well, I must first make a clear statement. My opinion doesn't come out of nowhere. Well, the Iranian people and the Jewish people actually share a deep history that stretches all the way back to the Babylonian exile, which was from 586 to 539 BC, when the Achaemenid king Cyrus the Great famously liberated the Jews from Nebuchadnezzar II and also commanded the rebuilding of their temple. Furthermore, the Purim festival recounts a compelling Persian Jewish narrative where Princess Esther weds the Persian king, ultimately rescuing the Jewish people within the Persian Empire from the machinations of the royal advisor Haman. That's why Haman's pockets exist. Furthermore, prior to 1979, we are aware that Iran and Israel maintained exceptionally strong ties under the Shah, particularly in economic, scientific, and technological domains. Thus, prior to 1979, 100,000 Israelis resided in Iran, and even with the mullah regime, Iran continues to host the Middle East's largest Jewish community after Israel. Therefore, my historical understanding is rooted in the fact that we have cultivated a very long and consistently positive history indeed, a strong friendship with both the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And furthermore, as a child, I myself experienced life in Iran. I know the nature of the Iranian people, very warm-hearted, very hospitable, and also, large parts are very educated. On the other hand, I was in Israel 2 months before the Hamas attack, and I gained perspectives there that I could never have acquired through reading or watching videos, that I would never have gained merely by reading or watching videos, insights that were truly unique and profound. It is simply a modern nation, a remarkably diverse and multifaceted state. A great deal of what I observed failed to align with the portrayal offered by specific media channels. Yes, so I also saw a lot of coexistence, technical innovation, startups, freedom, and democracy. And yes, because of environmental issues, Israel would also be an important ally for Iran to turn things around once the mullah regime is history. And these are all just components. I don't see as an Iranian or an Austro-Iranian person who was raised with Western values having the Houthis as allies, where women are systematically oppressed, where there is absolutely no freedom of speech, and where homophobia and anti-Semitism are unfortunately commonplace. For me, the sole democracy in the Middle East is indeed much more likely to stand as a significant potential ally for a truly free Iran in the future. So for me, there are several contributing factors. Firstly, from a historical perspective, and secondly, simply from a logical and democratic understanding, I find myself positively disposed towards the Jewish state. I'm positively disposed towards the Jewish state as an ally for a free Iran, and that we won't be experiencing Abraham Accords, but rather, in the vein of Cyrus the Great, we will see Cyrus Accords establishing peace between a liberated Iran and Israel. And in response to the other part of the question, yes, certainly there are not exclusively individuals within the Iranian community who hold a positive view of me. What's particularly interesting, especially when we look at the pro-Hamas marches happening in the West, these are precisely the specific factions of Iranian exiles who align themselves with either the Mujahideen or the Tudeh party. These groups claim to be left-wing, but then proceed to make common cause and cooperate with Islamists. So that's the specific group of Iranians residing abroad who hold a negative view of me. However, I must also point out that the vast majority of Iranians and Iranian women genuinely wish for a normalization of relations with Israel. They hold positive feelings towards both the Jewish people and the Jewish state, or at least remain neutral on the issue. However, I believe we are largely in agreement on this point, and you can hear these shouts echoing in Tehran, at Azadi, within Azadi Stadium, the football arena. Our money is not for Hamas and Hezbollah, our lives for Iran, and you can frequently hear this sentiment echoed throughout Iran. And I'd say it's not possible to shout after 3 years. Be chanting woman, life, freedom 3 years ago, only to then align yourselves with the proxies, those executioners of our very own people, and collaborate with them. That is simply paradoxical and incredibly contradictory. I genuinely believe one must demonstrate a strong backbone and stand firm, and I stand unequivocally with Israel and the Iranian population. For me, there are absolutely no ifs, ands, or buts. This truly concerns Western values and indeed Western civilization as a whole. And I unequivocally refuse to extend my hand to Islamists or any fascistic elements whatsoever. While the moral compass of numerous individuals is certainly more than questionable, but nowadays it's truly essential to speak with utmost clarity and frankness, and I am fully prepared and willing to do exactly that. And indeed, these are the compelling reasons establishing my desire for peace with Israel.
I genuinely and consistently feel that Iranians perceive those very same values you just spoke of as being much more present in Israel, and they yearn for them deeply as well. What are currently the most significant obstacles to a genuine dialogue between Iranians and Israelis? Could it be that this issue falls more within the domain of religious ideology or even geopolitical interests, which you briefly mentioned, or is the regime's propaganda machinery perhaps a crucial point where genuine dialogue might finally be able to take place?
Yes, so I think the question can be answered in a single answer. The primary obstacle standing between us, Israelis and Iranians, is truly the Islamic Republic. Period. For Israel, the primary concern is the assurance of its continued existence and potentially the establishment of lasting peace. Therefore, it boils down to security guarantees and true peace. However, for the Iranian population, it's truly all about experiencing and having freedom. That's the only thing standing between the two populations. However, as I mentioned, I believe that the populations themselves, to a significant extent, actually hold a very favorable perception of one another. And even within Europe, if one were to observe, for instance, the pro-Israel demonstrations, it's quite common to see not only the Israeli flag displayed, but also very often the Iranian flag too. Therefore, there are definite sympathies, and this isn't merely an isolated incident, rather. The Iranian populace has a deep understanding of the historical context that I previously brought up, and people are also very aware, because of the mullah's rule, exactly what Israel is up against and the difficult challenges it has to contend with. We are aware that Israel is currently contending with Hamas. We know Hamas is sponsored by the mullah regime. We know both of these political components are Islamist. Furthermore, we are acutely aware of the atrocities Islamists inflict upon individuals who refuse to submit to their will and who actively resist the prospect of suddenly finding themselves in a state where Sharia law is enforced, where capital punishment is carried out, and where women are subjected to horrific acts of violence. Jews face persecution, and minorities also endure persecution. Yes, and I simply believe that with a healthy dose of common sense, a normal individual will not conform to such actions, but will instead resist and defend themselves. And that is precisely why the solidarity shown towards Israel does not simply emerge from a void.
To what extent does the younger generation of Iranians in particular genuinely yearn for a harmonious and peaceful relationship with Israel? People are now distancing themselves even from this anti-Zionist rhetoric. You hear that more and more often. Can you say something about that?
Yes, well, I watched an incredible clip regarding that. I believe it's quite a bit older, but pictures speak much louder than 1,000 words. In Tehran, the capital of Iran, the mullah regime has installed a massive US flag and an Israeli flag on the ground, essentially encouraging people to literally walk all over the enemy, you know what I mean? On the great Satan, the USA, and the great Satan's little sister, Israel, right? The truly interesting part here is that the vast majority of people choose to simply walk around these flags rather than stepping over them. And the few individuals who chose to step on them were met with strong disapproval and booed by the vast majority of the Iranian populace. And you also find graffiti appearing in the city, where prominent pro-Israel slogans are boldly spray-painted on various buildings throughout Tehran. Or you hear resounding chants of solidarity from buildings, ensuring the entire neighborhood is aware that they are prepared to embrace peace with Israel and desire the downfall of the Islamic Republic. And indeed, as I previously mentioned, the younger generation possesses desires and requirements similar to those of young individuals in Western societies. Social media, dressing as they please, going on a movie date, going to a party with friends enjoying a beer, exchanging thoughts and ideas, connecting internationally with others, and also being able to articulate critical views and thoughts without necessarily having to fear any serious repercussions. And I believe Israel, in light of its complex political reality and circumstances, is the most ideal partner, also with its close ties to the US. And Iran would also be. It wouldn't just be captivating for its own Iranian populace, but Iran itself, also owing to its abundant economic resources and its highly educated populace, especially Iranian women, who, it's worth noting, frequently achieve greater success than men on numerous examinations, must also be said. It has tremendous potential. Iran would be a significantly large and highly appealing market where mutual interest would unequivocally exist on both sides. So, from both the Western and the Iranian perspectives.
Yes, thank you for those very clear and vivid examples. I think that helps to better grasp the situation, to understand and perhaps even better visualize it, especially if one doesn't have many points of contact with that specific region. Now let's turn our attention to Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi militias. Tehran currently continues to support the fight against Zionism. Is anyone among the general populace still taking these slogans seriously?
Well, it's simply, I can genuinely state, and I believe I speak for a great many Iranian men and women, directly from their hearts, that we absolutely do not desire this outcome. We advocate for our funds, our vital resources, to be channeled into schools, hospitals, and critical infrastructure. We want these investments to bolster education, scientific research, and our very own national economy, thereby contributing to the prosperity of the nation and its populace. We absolutely do not wish to lend our support to various Islamist proxies such as HAMAS in the Gaza Strip, or the Houthis operating in Yemen, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, because doing so simply does not align with the best interests of the Iranian people. And indeed, I truly mean to say, it must be said naturally that certain segments of the population, particularly those residing in rural locales, or among societal strata where educational attainment may not be particularly elevated, are likely more vulnerable to the anti-Zionist propaganda disseminated by the regime. However, it does have its boundaries. Most of the population has simply witnessed what the regime inflicts upon its own people, how the region is also being deliberately destabilized by the regime itself. This also serves as a distraction from its own internal failings within the state, within the nation itself. I'd say that the Iranian population certainly has a collective memory. Thus, one simply cannot overlook the harm inflicted over recent years and decades. And the mullah regime is in the process of creating its very own demons. With every Iranian citizen that they execute, with every intervention carried out by a proxy abroad, the regime inadvertently generates more and more adversaries for itself, gradually yet steadily, while simultaneously digging its own grave. It is effectively digging its own grave, and it's simply a matter of time before its complete downfall. We are conducting this interview right here and right now, but my question is, what kind of Iran do you anticipate we will witness in the next 5 to 10 years? And you can already see the trends. It will be a completely different Iran. And I'm not talking about the mullah regime, but about Iranian society. Moreover, I felt compelled to make an appeal to Western nations as well. The greatest ally for the West in the Middle East, particularly alongside Israel, would unequivocally be the Iranian population, simply based on their mindset, their perspective, their opinions. And I truly believe we must consider this more seriously, because if we don't, we risk repeating the exact same error we made with Putin's regime. One tends to think only in the short term, driven by financial and economic interests. When it comes to Russia, people think of Russian gas. With Iran, its oil and gas are quite enticing. However, it's crucial to focus on the long-term outlook. The escalation has already begun, and this regime will never find peace. So the appeasement policy has to end, exactly. And concerning the proxies, it truly was a significant triumph for Israel that, after enduring the most horrific assault on Jewish people since the Holocaust, Israel's wide-ranging retaliatory attack achieved its objectives. And it is highly likely that Hamas will no longer play any substantial role in shaping the future of the Gaza Strip. Just a few days back, the Lebanese president expressed the sentiment that there's a need to draw closer to Israel. Additionally, he noted that the Houthis are significantly damaging the global economy by targeting various commercial vessels navigating the Red Sea. I would definitely say that the tide has now turned, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Qatar and the mullah regime ought to grasp and understand that Israel did not arrive to disappear, but instead arrived to stay, and that it is not a colonial state, but rather the indigenous homeland of the Jewish people. And we will witness a fresh Middle East emerge, both in terms of proxy politics and in the domestic politics of certain countries in the Middle East.
Could you provide me with some additional details regarding the nuclear program of Iran? Recently, an international alarm was sounded, with advanced uranium enrichment being confirmed alongside the discovery of additional secret locations. Just how perilous is this progression, and how do you truly evaluate the stance of Western diplomacy concerning the regime in this matter?
Yes, well, there's no need for us to beat around the bush or waste any time discussing this particular matter. It is more than dangerous. We must not forget, and this is truly one of the crucial points I consistently endeavor to emphasize on an international level. So, Moscow, Tehran, and Beijing are striving for a new world order. The war that Ukraine is fighting against Russia, the war that Israel is fighting against the Islamists of the mullah regime in the Middle East and against Hamas, Taiwan's resistance against China, it's all the same conflict. They truly desire a new global order. They are actively seeking to destabilize the Western world, both externally and internally, and a significant portion of this ongoing threat to our Western civilization is undoubtedly the Islamic Republic's nuclear weapons program. For far too long, policy has been predicated on a faulty nuclear deal, in my estimation negotiated under Barack Obama in Vienna back in 2015, which entirely disregarded the actual circumstances of the Iranian populace, utter appeasement towards the rulers, the tyrannical rulers currently in Tehran. That is absolutely the wrong approach to take. I mean, one can hold whatever political views they wish about Donald Trump, but concerning the Middle East, I genuinely believe he grasps the region more thoroughly than his two predecessors ever did. And this particular regime actively exploits dialogue and our misguided tolerance, constantly appeasing and continuously downplaying everything. And as I mentioned earlier, precisely the same approach was unfortunately taken with Putin, albeit in a different way, a truly misguided diplomacy, regrettably. Tolerance indeed, but certainly not tolerance towards intolerance and towards authoritarian regimes. Democracies must defend themselves against autocracies. They want to test democratic systems, and these systems must be able to defend themselves. And I think that if you recognize you have a potential ally, such as the Iranian people, then you should absolutely take the threat posed by a nuclear program with utmost seriousness, particularly when there is a ticking clock until the State of Israel is slated to cease its existence. And to me, the 12-day war is really not just a 12-day war. We do have a current ceasefire in place now. However, genuine peace in the Middle East remains a distant prospect, as it will only materialize once Hamas is disarmed and the mullah regime in Tehran ceases its rule with authority ultimately restored to the Iranian populace. Furthermore, as you've pointed out, with the uranium enrichment efforts, it appears that the regime might currently be in a weakened state, partly due to the recent American military actions that followed Israel's strike against the Islamic Republic. However, this regime will never be at peace. It is unequivocally driven by religious fanaticism and has practically also declared the Jews, the State of Israel, as the enemy, and they pursue this ideology just like the Nazi regime did back then. We are grappling with a fascist, Islamist dictatorship that is resolutely prepared to do absolutely everything within its power to hurl the entire region into an abyss of chaos and destruction. And I still believe that many people in Europe, including numerous politicians, have not yet fully grasped the true nature of what we are truly facing here. Nevertheless, this action will certainly backfire, and then people will once again ponder, questioning how such a dire situation could have possibly arisen. And I simply believe that the 12-day conflict was merely a precursor, a foretaste of the much larger and more significant events that are still destined to unfold within the Middle Eastern region. This did not happen by chance. The proxy conflict escalated into a direct war, primarily due to the mullah regime's atomic threats aimed at Israel. And the US has targeted key uranium enrichment facilities, essentially sending a clear message that there are limits and no further steps will be tolerated. Well, you can see from the unsuccessful negotiations on the European side, Great Britain, France, Germany, that this policy of appeasement is not yielding any positive results and that it represents a mistaken path. The right way is simply peace through strength and also supporting the Iranian population. That's truly the sole method to effectively contain the mullah regime's nuclear threat. How serious do you consider the current danger of war to be right now? I mean, the regime recently threatened war against Israel and the US once more, and as you rightly stated, they are very much weakened. Is this actually more for internal propaganda, or is there a real danger of war that we need to keep an eye on? Yes, absolutely, without question. I mean, I would instantly endorse the idea that we should have peace throughout the Middle East and that everything should be harmonious, joyful, and completely serene. However, it would be prudent for us to realistically assess and categorize all aspects as well. And the undeniable reality is that the Islamic Republic and Hamas are simply not suitable peace partners for achieving a genuinely stable and peaceful Middle East. And it's not only Israel that views it this way. Countries such as Egypt, or in North Africa, Morocco, or the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia all perceive it similarly. Thus, there exists a sensible group of individuals within the Middle East. Unfortunately, there are also nations that waver, oscillating back and forth, and they remain within the sphere of influence of Ayatollah Khamenei. And yes, I truly believe the indicators are positive, suggesting that the rational forces within the Middle East will ultimately succeed. However, it remains a considerably long journey. And stemming from the fact, with a ceasefire, particularly in the Gaza Strip, there's a significant opportunity and potential to forge a new and peaceful Middle East. However, we can't speak of this in terms of mere days or months. Similar to the situation with Iran concerning the broader Middle East, we truly must consider the span of years to fully grasp the genuine ramifications of the history unfolding right before our very eyes at this very moment.
In Iran, there's also the new Defense Council as a reaction to the failure in the war against Israel. So, what specific function does this council truly serve, and what is its purpose? Could it genuinely be an effort by them to reassert their authority over the military and to regain their former strength and influence?
Yes, I must state that a considerable amount of propaganda and symbolic policy is being employed by the regime. Essentially, the Supreme Mullah is positioned at the top of the dictatorship's state apparatus, embodying both religious and political authority within that structure, effectively wielding both powers. This is all just a show of politics, superficial posturing. But what I'm thinking is that they're quite aware of how easily their structures were infiltrated by Mossad. Many Iranians who harbor negative feelings towards the regime have also cooperated with Israel, and those who have independently taken action against the regime have demonstrated that there are. Numerous cracks and inherent weaknesses have been brought to light. Consequently, the regime now, quite naturally, feels a strong urge to demonstrate, no, we are actively implementing substantial reforms, or to establish specific organizations right now to actively resist these issues, asserting, we still maintain unwavering control. Of course, this is just for show. The mullahs have nothing under control anymore. It is in fact far more out of control, and this situation poses an extremely serious and potentially catastrophic threat to the stability within Iran itself. I truly hope that it doesn't eventually degenerate into a civil war at some specific point in the future. However, the regime is weaker than it has ever been. And it is my belief that the Revolutionary Guards are understandably speculating about the potential to seize power if, by chance, Khamenei were to pass away. Because he has been almost constantly in hiding already. We witnessed it during the recent conflict with Israel. So where was the mighty supreme leader then? In a secure bunker indeed. And it's important not to overlook that, during the conflict with Israel, numerous nuclear physicists, many generals, commanders, and highly ranked politicians were removed from the scene, and many folks recognize the mullah regime's fragility, and many are also pondering, perhaps I could grab a slice of the pie and snatch power for myself. And frankly, the regime won't actually possess comprehensive military control anyway, because they practically operate with a state within a state. The Revolutionary Guards, in a broader sense, could indeed be considered a significant major power, yes. This is also reflected by Hezbollah in Lebanon. So you have a state within a state, and the Revolutionary Guards have a great deal of influence over what is decided, both in domestic and foreign policy. And I'm not really sure about that. If Khamenei passes away, another mullah won't necessarily be leading the Islamic Republic. Instead, it's quite possible that the Revolutionary Guards will attempt to seize power for themselves. But that's not the answer to Iran's problems either. What's needed is a complete break with the regime, including the Revolutionary Guards. We can't forget, there are the Revolutionary Guards and Iran's military. Thus, the regime will never possess complete control over both of its military branches. Rather, one branch generally dictates the direction within the mullah regime, while the other, though present, simply lacks the necessary financial resources, organizational structure, or overall influence of its de facto counterpart.
Could you clarify for me, what are the exact connections linking Hezbollah and the Houthis to the Revolutionary Guards? And how truly stable are these alliances generally for Iran, considering all these proxies surrounding it? Maybe you can give us a very brief overview to help us understand that a little better. This is something that very often gets overlooked in the ongoing media reporting and news coverage. You always hear about one thing or the other. What exactly is the structure, the overall picture?
Yes, so ever since the revolution, there's been a significant shift in focus. Instead of merely orchestrating a political conflict in the Middle East, the emphasis has explicitly been on declaring, look, this is a religious war we are engaged in. And that includes not only the State of Israel, but also, quite naturally, the royal house of Saudi Arabia, situated on the other side of the Persian Gulf. For the mullah regime, the issue at hand is quite simply about to figure out who truly holds the power or has the upper hand, the dominance in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, or even Iran. And they've started, specifically in the last 2 decades, though its roots naturally extend to the revolution's inception, but particularly in these most recent 20 years, to forge what's known as the Shiite Crescent. This crescent spans from Lebanon, across Syria, through Iraq, and then extends through Iran and also sort of the Shiite minority in Yemen to conduct these proxy wars, so to speak. And it's certainly no mere coincidence that the Houthis have repeatedly attacked and bombed oil refineries in Saudi Arabia, and that both Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are deeply entangled in the Yemeni civil war. And on this topic, we must not forget the most extensive humanitarian catastrophe currently unfolding in the Middle East is in Yemen, where more than 500,000 have perished and millions have been displaced. But no one really cares, because if there's no juice, there's no news. When Jewish people aren't involved, there's no scapegoat to be found. When Muslims engage in warfare and slaughter other Muslims, it appears that no one really cares. I just really wanted to ensure that point was made, and you can see how the mullah regime, with the help of the Revolutionary Guards, has built this up. In my estimation, the Revolutionary Guards stand as the most perilous Islamist organization across the Middle East, having adeptly established these structures that reach significantly beyond national boundaries. So Iraq, in my opinion, this isn't just my personal view, From a political standpoint, it truly seems as if Iraq is being treated like a colony by the mullah regime, and it's quite clear, and rightfully so, that the Iraqi populace has no wish for the Revolutionary Guards to involve themselves in Iraq. Even after the invasion by Western powers and after Saddam Hussein, the nation is no longer willing to endure constant turmoil and conflict. Instead, they earnestly desire to achieve a state of lasting peace and stability, and one can certainly witness the devastation caused by the mullah regime in Syria. In Syria, how long Assad was practically supported by them. This naturally includes Russia, interestingly. And many Syrians explicitly do not desire a mullah presence, nor do they want revolutionary guards in Syria. A lot of Lebanese citizens do not desire the revolutionary guards' presence. Naturally, given the profound religious fanaticism prevalent within the region, it becomes effortless for the revolutionary guards to identify and cultivate relationships with potential partners, establishing crucial connections to further their objectives. And naturally, many individuals are quite susceptible to the propaganda, primarily because of the pervasive anti-Semitism prevalent in the Middle East, or even the underlying sentiments that fuel such narratives. The way they conduct warfare against minority groups such as the Druze, Christians, women, Armenians, and Kurds. That's actually not something that just began yesterday in the Middle East. For many centuries, it has been a commonplace and daily occurrence to proceed against these specific population groups, or indeed against those with differing views. And yes, that's precisely why it's not at all challenging for the Revolutionary Guards to forge alliances in the Middle East, and when considered in a wider, grander context, as a philosophical or even a societal approach. From my perspective, there is also a clear lack of enlightenment in specific regions of the Middle East. Islam is also younger than Christianity, and it's also younger than Judaism. However, there's simply a profound lack of enlightenment, and in this current era of globalism, this comparatively younger religion is now confronting and clashing with modernity, inevitably resulting in conflicts at particularly sensitive geopolitical locations, as we can clearly see.
Yes, thank you for providing that comprehensive overview of the current occurrences. Now let's address one final question that touches upon the future outlook for the younger generation in Iran, both young men and women. At the moment, the economic situation, as we mentioned at the beginning, can only be described as catastrophic. The middle class is crumbling and poverty continues to expand. In what ways is this ongoing crisis currently impacting the entire societal fabric and structure? More specifically, does the younger generation still envision positive future prospects for themselves? Is there perhaps a stronger determination now to finally bring about that change?
Indeed, I truly must express that I am able to provide a clear illustration using an experience from my personal family. My family and I procure medications in Europe and arrange for them to be delivered to Iran via third-party individuals because my family in Iran, simply due to the prevailing economic conditions, is unable to purchase their necessary medications or indeed various necessities for everyday living. We frequently transfer funds to Iran as well. We also extend our help to others. For instance, we maintain connections with a nomadic tribe in Iran, whom we provide financial assistance to, as the regime there is actively suppressing the nomads' traditional living areas. Yes, indeed, the situation is quite brutal. I would say that all the alarm sirens are blaring really loudly right now. It's already past midnight, so Iran isn't just on the brink of an economic collapse. Iran is in fact already deep in the throes of an economic collapse. Of course, the population, when people are perpetually cornered, continuously pressed against the wall, and afforded absolutely no space whatsoever to even breathe, they will start to fight back. And it's really all these various puzzle pieces that I've already mentioned as examples, whether it's women's rights, the economic situation, human rights, environmental matters. These all function as cogs in a larger machine, each turning the next, and it all accumulates. to a revolution eventually. So the powder keg isn't just on the brink of exploding, it has in fact already ignited. And it's true, a significant number of young individuals are naturally drawn to move abroad. Furthermore, I'm now observing numerous young Iranians, both men and women, across Europe. They are embarking on journeys, escaping via Turkey and traversing the Persian Gulf, all with the fervent hope of experiencing an ordinary existence and savoring the liberties that are simply unavailable in Iran under the current Islamic Republic. The only real question is, of course, that various emotions are at play here. Naturally, we all deeply desire a revolution and the overthrow of the mullah regime, and I genuinely believe that day is approaching and is not very far off in the future. However, there is also optimism on the opposing side. On yet another hand, we also have emotions like fear, such as mistrust, asking, who can I truly confide in, and the fear of war. Naturally, we're relieved when the very buildings of the mullah regime are bombed, especially when political figures are completely eliminated from the scene. However, simultaneously, it's certainly not a pleasant experience when your own nation is getting bombarded, and even though that's happening, even though efforts are made to minimize civilian casualties as much as possible, unfortunately, civilian casualties still happen. Even though we know that Israel is deliberately targeting the mullah regime and bombing its institutions. But of course, fear is also a factor. Fear of war, fear that the mullah regime will crack down even harder on the population, and these are simply all the various elements and factors that must be duly considered when addressing the question, what do the young individuals in Iran truly desire? How do they feel at this moment? And I believe it's quite divided. I think where everyone agrees is that we don't want the Islamic Republic. Some are prepared to stand up and engage in battle, and they do fight, which is incredibly brave. It is not me who is courageous, but the people in Iran. I can merely be their spokesperson here. And on the other hand, you have people who are naturally afraid because they have families, because they have dreams, wishes. But I truly believe it must be clear to absolutely everyone that none of us will ever be able to fulfill our dreams. Within Iran, or concerning Iran itself, should this present regime persist in its hold on power. Because at some point we'll inevitably arrive at a critical juncture where we, as Iranians, regardless of whether we identify as monarchists or Republicans, women or men, whether heterosexual or homosexual, or if we happen to be Kurds, Persians, Balokis, Azeris, Jews, Assyrians, Armenians, and so on, or even Arabs from Khuzestan, at some point we must ask, do we want a free Iran? Or will our country be destroyed for good, and not by the USA or Israel, as the regime's propaganda tries to sell it, but by the Islamic Republic itself? And I truly believe this nation is deserving of salvation and rescue. In my opinion, the population particularly merits nothing but the best, and a liberated Iran has the immense potential to contribute significantly to its own prosperity and to offer a great deal of constructive benefit to all of humanity. And yes, I think one vacillates somewhere along the spectrum between hope and fear. Nevertheless, I do believe that due to the nation's ingrained mentality and its profound historical background, hope will ultimately prevail and emerge more powerfully in the end.
Okay, I think that's a beautiful closing thought. Thank you for your time. If you wish to delve deeper and discover more about Simon, you will definitely find detailed information available in the video's description, as well as within our interview. And with that, Simon, I'd like to extend my very best wishes to you for your future and for your academic pursuits.
Thanks a lot.
And I wish you a very pleasant day ahead.
Thanks, you have a great day as well.
Thanks, Simon.
Mena-Watch, der unabhängige Nahost-Thinktank. Besuchen Sie auch unsere Website. Dort finden Sie täglich neue aktuelle Berichte und ausführliche wissenschaftlich fundierte Hintergrundanalysen zur Geschichte und Gegenwart der MENA-Region.